Well, hello, grievers. Mandy here. Restorative grief is all about creating easy access to healing, no matter where or who you are. That's why I want you to remember that if you want grief support beyond a podcast, our Patreon features monthly workbooks to accompany each episode, as well as a Discord channel for more private chats and occasional bonus content as well. Supporting this work with your finances means investing in your own wellness and the healing of others, and that in itself is an incredibly generous and restorative practice. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes, but reach out with questions, okay? Now, let's get on to this week's episode. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 139, titled Elevating End-of-Life Conversations with Erin Whelan. My guest today is Erin Whelan, the founder of Compassionate Coaching, an organization dedicated to restoring dignity to the grieving and dying. Their mission is to ensure every individual feels seen and heard by filling the cups of their caregivers and enhancing caregiver communication skills. Erin started Compassionate Coaching in late 2020 after 14 years as an actress and role player, mainly in medical education. Through the Playback Theater modality, Erin crafts engaging and meaningful programs focused on empathy for end-of-life professionals to help them heal and to help develop their own continued understanding of their work with the dying. And her approach is deeply informed by her own personal journey with grief, including when her sister Gina passed in 2016. We will also briefly touch on what it's like to live past the age at which your loved one died, which is a deeply misunderstood and easily missed event in our grief stories. So I'm excited for you to hear all about Erin's story, her heart, and to learn more about Compassionate Coaching. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and today I'm so honored to bring you Erin Whelan. She is the founder of Compassionate Coaching, which is an organization dedicated to restoring dignity to the grieving and the dying. Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Mandy. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited because your company, Compassionate Coaching, has a very unique approach to supporting caregivers and creating grief education. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is that sets your work apart from other compassionate coaching groups and education programs that might be out there?
Sure. Well, there are two basic parts of my business. One is the team building aspect, and we use a modality called Playback Theater. I've been doing playback since 2010. And it's a beautiful art form that's done around the world in 70 countries. And we basically hear people's stories, and then a team of actors and musicians will play back their story. So it's all about having people share their stories and then having their story reflected back to them in an artistic way. And I love to do this for people in the end of life field and the bereavement field because they pour out so much love and they don't always take the time to receive love and to be reminded of why they got into this work. And so we love to do that for people. We love to give them the time that they need to reflect, to feel seen and heard, and to bond with one another.
It's almost like improv theater, but with deep intention for healing.
Yes, thank you. Because I'm always looking for a way to talk about it. And I think I'm going to coin that.
Yeah, take it.
Appreciate
It's
it.
all for you.
Great.
I love it. So why? Why work with the grieving and the caregivers and the death world and the dying? What is it that made you go from a world and a background as a professional actress, right, into, well, let's be really intentional and go after the hardest field there is?
Right. Yeah. It's not for the faint of heart, is it?
No.
It's kind of, I know, like, why am I choosing this? Well, the medium story, it's like, do I go the short version or the long version? I'll go the medium length version of the backstory. I was looking to do something new because as a freelance actor, once the pandemic hit, all the jobs went away. No one was hiring us. Industrial videos, training videos, theater, all of it just shut down.
Right.
And I founded my company, and it took me a long time. That was in the fall of 2020. It took me a while to say, let me focus on these people. These are the people I want to serve. And that moment came because I was journaling. I actually was praying and I was like, let me look and see, like, I was probably 45 at the time. And I was saying, okay, up until this moment in time, what have been the touchstone moments in my life? What have been the things that I look back and I say, this was important for one reason or another, whether it's a relationship with someone, a job, an opportunity, a conversation even. And I just started noting all of those different conversations and moments and jobs. And when I looked at the list, I was thinking to myself, the common thread seems to be grieving and death and dying. And I don't think I can run away from that. I think I need to be intentional about, these are my people. These are the people that I feel called to serve. These are the people that I want to bring this beautiful art form to. And it's funny because even though I made that commitment a while back, maybe 2 years ago now, I've wavered. And every time I waver and I'm like, oh, but what about these people over here? It just never quite works out. And I go back to my beautiful people in the world of grieving and death and dying. And I say, nope, these are the people I'm meant to be here.
Yeah. That idea of touchstones is really insightful. And I love how, even though you have a heart for other demographics and areas, it's easy to say, what's my role? What literally, what's my role as an actress? Great question.
Exactly.
To do the thing. What thing am I intended to do while I'm here? So what would you say about those touchstone moments that helped you land on the world of bereavement? The caregivers are the people who need to be reminded that their story is just as valid.
Two things come to mind when you ask that question, Mandy. One is a conversation I had with my cousin at my sister's wake. So my sister died in 2016, and this was clearly before the pandemic, before I launched this business, before I really focused in on the people that I serve. And she said, I don't know if this is going to come out the right way or not. She says, but I think, in some background, my sister Gina had really severe cerebral palsy. And so she was cared for very intentionally and deeply by my parents for her 45 years on this planet.
Wow.
And my cousin said, I don't know if this is going to come out the right way, but I really think that having Gina in your life it made you who you are. And I see in you, the ability to listen and the ability to empathize and the ability to be compassionate towards others. And I think that's because of your upbringing and being surrounded by this family where Gina was an ever-present reminder of suffering in the world.
Mm.
And that moment was one of the touchstones. When I was looking back, I was saying, gosh, what are the moments that I think about a lot and that really feel important to my life? And that was one of them. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. The second one is that, I am not someone at the deathbed of people. I am not someone who is working in hospice. I am not someone who is doing that active work. And I think that most of us in that camp, we look at what they do and we say, I don't know if I could do that. And so I think we as a collective say, oh, we need you. We need you because, there is an exploding aging population. Even without that, people deserve to have an end to their life that feels full of dignity and compassion and love. And so we need the people who are doing that work. And so I don't think I'm called to do that work, at least not at this stage of my life. And yet I want to do what I can to support those who are doing that work.
It takes a very unique individual to work as a caregiver in hospice work. And we know that, speaking of your parents, we know that like 80% of caregivers are family members, right? It's never the easy decision, but it's the most reasonable, often the only affordable experience that people can offer their loved ones. And that takes a heavy toll. It's affordable financially, but maybe, but definitely not cognitively or emotionally. Like there's a heavy cost. So I love that you recognize that, and also how your work can support those people, because the resources are hard to come by. They're not non-existent. They exist. They're just really hard to look for when someone doesn't know what to say I need help with, right? We put ourselves in that selfless giving position and don't necessarily know what we need to refill our cup, so to speak.
That's exactly it. And with regard to the resources, you're so correct that especially for someone who's a full-time, in air quotes, full-time caregiver. I mean, it's beyond 40 hours a week.
Right.
You are doing this and you're basically in survival mode every day of your life. And so you don't have the luxury of time to sit and Google, what are my local resources available to me? Like it doesn't even occur to you oftentimes that someone could do that for you. Someone could advocate on your behalf and find things. And because you're just in survival mode.
Yeah.
And that's a lot. It takes a huge toll on a person.
Well, let's talk for a second about how that individual can support themselves or can even explore what playback theater might look like for them, even in their like day-to-day lives. How, if someone says, okay, I'm clearly dysregulated, I'm at the end of my rope, I cannot continue to go on, I'm in that hyper vigilant state, and all I'm doing is what is muscle memory to survive at this point. We know that giving air to their story is just as important as the work they do caring for someone who is dying. How can they start to recognize that the intentionality of playback theater could be a really beautiful resource for them?
I think it's one of those things that you have to experience. It's one of those things that you need an invitation to say, you've got to come to this thing, and I promise you it will help you.
Mm.
It's hard to give someone that experience without them having the official experience, but I just think we need to support each other. Like we need to be there. We need to have people in our world who will say, okay, I can't give you this thing right now, but here's what I can do. I can say, how are you doing? Really? Like, really, how are you doing? And then just listen. Because what playback is, it's artistry and music, and it's an official storytelling idea and format, but that's not always accessible. So what are we doing? We're listening very, very deeply.
Mm.
So find someone who can listen to you very, very deeply and hear you and reflect back to you, because reflecting back what someone is feeling is so powerful. And so maybe the story is, I'm exhausted, I am so worn out, I don't know how much longer I can do that. If you have a good friend or a family member who can just reflect that back to you and say, you sound so depleted, you sound so discouraged, you sound on the verge of despair, or you sound hopeless. Like even just hearing those words said back to you can feel so affirming. Even just having someone to listen, a sounding board, not necessarily to vent, although that also has its place, but really to have that conversation, that connection, and that validation. That's so important.
Well, yeah, and confirming, this is what am I hearing that correctly? You sound depleted. Is that a good word to describe it? I mean, that goes into my work, right? But at the same time, being able to get them to agree, yes, that's right. Um, I'm curious, what is some of the feedback you've received from people who've gone through a session of playback theater? How has it impacted them? How has it changed the way they show up for themselves?
That's a beautiful question. My favorite feedback was a quote. We did a leadership retreat for a hospice staff, and the best quote I ever received was that it's the best thing you've never seen before. And I'm like, that pretty much sums it up, because you've probably never experienced this, and it's really amazing. And so that is my favorite feedback. We recently did a storytelling workshop in March, and we're doing it again in June, shortly after this episode airs. And the feedback after the March storytelling workshop was phenomenal. It was just an hour long virtually. And people were saying, that they were rejuvenated in their work. It exceeded their expectations.
Wow.
It was transformative. And I'm like, wow, like that's very powerful to hear that after just 1 hour of this art form.
That's amazing because it's that's the experience we're looking for in grief work, right? Transformation, restoration, encouragement, grounding, healing. Those are the $5 words we want to spend all day long, but it does take a very intentional and safe environment to be able to experience that. And I would think that people in the hospice world and working with bereavement are equipped to be in the discomfort of telling their vulnerability to a stranger and then having it reflected back to them on a stage, right, in front of others. So
Yes.
that type of person is already used to having those challenging conversations and uncomfortable moments. Um, but I imagine it still develops their ability to communicate and tell their own story so much more as well, because they're used to delivering the bad news or like working with families and saying, here are facts. Here is what your person's experiencing. But how difficult is it to get people to in that industry even start to open up for themselves for their own story?
Well, I have been pleasantly surprised that they are eager, ready, and willing.
Good.
They just dive right in. And in fact, we had 3 or 4, we call them tellers or storytellers at our March event virtually. And they all gave permission. Like I reached out afterwards and I said, look, like, as you can tell, this is a really unique art form. If you're comfortable with it, I would love to be able to use, this clip that is either your story reflected back to you or you sharing your story, only if you're comfortable to share it with other people who might be interested in the art form but don't quite understand it. And all 3 immediately said, of course, absolutely. I shared my story because it's part of my person's legacy. I mean, the responses were just unanimous in the fact that they said, "Oh yeah, I'm totally comfortable with that." So not only were they comfortable in the moment, but then later said, "Yes, feel free to spread this wider."
I think that comes from recognizing how much confidence we gain and embodiment we can bring into our world once we start telling our story and we see it received positively as well.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's so important. And I know you do this work too, of holding that space for people
Yeah.
to feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable, to be comfortable enough to share personal stories and things that might be hard to vocalize. And then to have the ability to sit back and to have it reflected back to you, that is vulnerability at its finest, really. And we know, though, that if you are being held in that safe space and you choose to step into the vulnerability, you get so much back. You get such comfort and you get such reflection of your feelings and your experience. And not only from us, the playback team, but then the other people too who are there.
Yeah.
Because people are able to say, me too. Yes, it's my experience too. Or, wow, you are so brave. Or whatever they're able to connect. And then we also love to always connect people to each other and say, okay, like who connected to Mandy's story? And people will just, their hands will just shoot up because that's what it is. It's the human experience. And the more we're willing to share it, the more we see we're not alone. This is part of our humanity.
I was just talking with someone about that exact topic. Are we grieving alone or are we alone in our grief? And
Mm,
that there's a big difference between those two things, even though they sound like, two ways of saying the same sentence. Um, because you're not wrong when we recognize, oh my God, someone else gets it, even if it's just a piece of our story, or someone else validates our story to say, oh my, I never had words to understand what I was experiencing. And now there's language for it, or that's a thing. I can't tell you how many times I've confirmed someone's like experience and said, yeah, here's what your brain is doing in that moment, or here's what is true about our understanding of the grief experience and process. And the validation that is received in that moment, the honor of their story and their process, you're right, restores their dignity, gives them a piece of their humanity back that we often feel is lost forever when we lose someone or something that is so deeply meaningful to us. So, yeah,
absolutely.
that safe space to
Absolutely.
share is beautiful.
Yeah. And it sounds like what you're doing is really confirming for them that this is part of the process. You are not alone. This is normal, quote unquote normal, which
Right.
it can, if you say it delicately and in a compassionate way, it can be very affirming that the experience you're having is very common for people who are going through what you're going through, and you're not alone, and others have experienced this too.
Yeah. I think even going beyond saying, hey, this is normal, we just say, let's just normalize it. Because if you're
Mm.
experiencing it in loss and you can connect the dots, it's highly likely someone else is doing the same, experiencing similar symptoms or characteristics and doesn't know how to put the words to it. So let's normalize it and talk about it and see what comes up. And if it's just you, okay, we refer to deeper needs and deeper things to show up for you. But um, so far, every single time we start to normalize an experience of loss, others flock to say, oh, like you said, me too. Thank goodness I'm not the only one. Now there are people who can work with me. And speaking of that and your personal story, I wanted to ask you some questions. You'd mentioned it earlier about losing Gina when she was 45. And I know you said that you turned 45 a few years ago too. That experience of meeting the age of our loved one when they died, and then passing it is deeply complicated. So speaking of normalizing some things, I would love just for you to share what that sensation was like and what you've learned now that you're a few years out from that experience too.
I have learned a lot. I look back now, so I'm 47. So I've lived about a year and a half past Gina's age that she was when she died. And I've got to say, when I was 46, which is, the age she never reached, it was in many ways a lost year for me.
Mm,
I couldn't remember how old I was. People would ask me, I would literally have to do the math. I would say, okay, 1976 and it's 2023. And I was lost. And I actually, near the end of being 46, I actually started having some health concerns. And I am convinced this is all connected, that this is all about outliving my sister. And it was just, I had a conversation with a dear friend who's also in the world of grief, Maureen Desmond. She's fabulous. And I was telling her about my experience. I started having migraines out of the blue, just
mm,
bam, out of the blue, right before I turned 47. And I was telling her about this, and I was telling her about one particular night that I literally thought I was dying. I thought I had a brain tumor. I'm dying. We need to go to the ER.
yeah.
It was horrible. I was having all of these like things that I would have never expected to be going through my mind, go through my mind as I thought I was dying. And things like, oh, my husband doesn't know my passwords like for this bill
Yeah.
or that, like these things that, you think would never be the things that you're thinking about, but they were absolutely the things. And I was referring to this night with my friend Maureen, and I was telling her about it. And she said, it's not a brain tumor, it's grief. And that just floored me. And I knew logically that grief can affect our bodies, and yet I was experiencing it, and there was such a disconnect until that moment when she spoke those words, that, oh, this is all related to my grief. And I was forced because of these health concerns to really, I've listened to a couple episodes on your podcast, and I know you've mentioned January is your rough month.
Mhm.
Gina died November 30th. And so December is my rough month. And just all this last December, it was just so much rest and reflection and lack of doing. And I wasn't perfect at it, but it was way less activity than I'm used to. And I just finally let the grief start to come to the surface, 6 years after her death, or however far away we are from 2016, finally allowing that grief to come to the surface for the first time. And it's not done. Like, I'm not done. It's still very, very, very present. And it's hard. It's really hard to get to that age and then pass it. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah. I think one thing that's interesting about just touching on what you mentioned about the body is we disallow ourselves from experiencing grief and as more than a emotional or cognitive process in a lot of ways. It's why the work I do with the somatic practices and integrating all of those pieces together is so important because we also know that trauma lives in a different part of the brain than cognition and talk therapy can reach too. So when we can connect those dots, not saying that all grief has trauma, but all trauma does have grief attached. And so bringing it to the surface is a lifelong experience. It is learning to recognize, is this just a headache? Or am I a month out from that anniversary that I keep wanting to forget about? And I'm pretending that's not it. But I think also, too, what's interesting about reaching the age of what you said about losing your own age. I immediately was like, yes, let's normalize that. I forget consistently how old my mom was when she died, also in 2016. And then I will sit and obsess over, was she 52 or 53? Because I just turned 40, but her birthday was later in the year. So how old was she actually? Like my mind will try to make sense of it. And if I'm not cognizant and present with myself, I'll start getting a tummy ache or my neck will start to hurt. And these things that I'm used to, like tummy aches, okay, maybe you ate bad eggs. That's normal, right?
Right.
Okay, but when we allow ourselves to connect some dots back to, wait a minute, my nervous system is like, hey, dangerous thought territory. You're going to need a threat response because you're getting into something that's not so great for you. Um, we can't see ourselves in the way that we deserve to be seen. And this is sincerely why I just love this idea of playback theater for grief support, because it is literally witnessing someone else embodying your story and using their body to tell what needs to be told. It is inviting people into that space where they use and partner with their bodies. Even though we know most of us don't know how to create that safety in our bodies, and that's part of the grief work, being able
Mhm.
to see someone else do it in an environment that is safe and is respectful is an incredible gift. So
Yeah.
that's just my like, yay, good job. I'm so impressed and like grateful that your work exists in the world. I don't want to get too far away from this turning the same age thing, but my brain was going like, yes, yes, it's so good. So with your sister's death, with age 45, she had severe cerebral palsy. That's not something that we grow into. It's something we're born with. I'm curious if you've talked with anyone else who's experienced that similar sensation of I'm approaching the age where my person died. Because for me, my mom was in her early 50s, again, can't remember which age, but she had cancer. It was all over, but it started as really insane sinus infections and lymph node
Mm.
swelling, right? They didn't test for anything. So I will tell you, here's a vulnerable moment for everyone else. Every single time I have a sinus infection, which happens to be right now as well, my brain goes to, but I'm not 52 or 53 yet. I'm only 40. Isn't
Mm.
that fascinating? Like, speaking of
Oh my goodness.
doing your own work, but it's so interesting. My doctors are so loving and they're like, so we're not going to run every test and it's going to be okay because we know what this is. But I think that that's a really typical experience as well, as for people who are doing grief work and are allowing that really deep awareness to surface. Sometimes our deep awareness is not necessary, right? Sometimes we get a little too into the thinking part of it and we ruminate on stuff, or we respond in a fear response because of evidence that we have that says this is a reasonable response, right? As if we could control or prevent the uncertainty. So I'm curious for you, even though your sister died from something very different, how has that affected your awareness of your own body and your own, when you encounter illness or any other experience in life? Um, how does that combined with like your experience in playback theater really serve you?
That's a beautiful question. I think the answer is it probably affects me more than I know. I think it's going to be something that's just like the migraine brain tumor comment that my friend said, and I think I'm still discovering. I think I'm still in the season of discovering all the ways that this is affecting my here and now.
Mm.
And So I don't even know. I'm willing to wait for the surprises that it brings. I think that there's just such a journey that we're on as grievers. And I don't know if you feel this way too, but I often feel as though like I'm a bit type A and I like to have it all figured out. And I mean, I don't have it figured out. Like I'm still figuring it out as I'm helping other people. And so there's this sense of I don't know everything yet. I can speak definitely to the fact with some retrospect that 46 was a quote unquote lost year for me. I was lost, I was confused, I was just kind of meandering and not clear. And 47 feels completely different.
Mhm.
And so I don't even know what is next if I'll have other dips of lost years, if I'll have dips of, reaching, I'm a mom, and maybe when I reach my mom's age that she was when my sister died, maybe that will be hard for me too, to say, oh my gosh, I'm the age where my mom lost a child. I'm not ready to lose my child. Like, I think it's just all a mystery as to how this grief is going to affect me.
I love that you said, I'm willing to wait for the surprises that it brings. I think that is such a present minded mindset, but like present minded willingness to remain and to stay in wonder. That's something I know a lot of grievers struggle with. Wonder is a risk. Wonder is not just imagination and hopeful futures. Wonder is fear. Wonder has a lot of uncomfortable associations with it as well. So being able to say, well, I'm willing to trust and wait and see what surprises it brings allows you to also really partner with that yes and background of theater, but
Yeah,
the
right.
but it's also just a beautiful approach to something we cannot control. I tend to be a future oriented person, so I have to pull myself back into present moments. And I think the ability to just cultivate, what if I only think about today? What if I only think about right now? I'm willing to do that, knowing full well things will come. And that's why we do the grief work, so that we are better equipped down the road when something else changes, because that's it. We're not avoiding loss. We're not going through one grief event and then saying, ah, yes, I feel healed. I will never experience that again because I know better now. Now I know how to handle myself if I'm grieving. Maybe you did in that instance, but as someone who has lost more people than I can count, I will tell you I have never been prepared for it, no matter
Mhm.
what the loss is or who the loss is compared to, or not compared, but connected to, however they're connected to me. Um, yeah, I want to touch on something else that I think is really important about your work, and we kind of chatted briefly about it, is how grief professionals, but also people who are just in supportive roles in their friends' lives, are communicating with each other. I love that you said your friend, I don't know if this will come out right, but I need to
Mhm.
say it, kind of softening the blow of, I don't know how to say the thing. How do you help healthcare professionals, but also just people communicate in a way that's appropriate and in a way that isn't very jarring and that kind of cold bedside manner? Because I suspect that seeing their own stories reflected back would soften them a lot. And we know burnout is extremely prevalent in this industry, no matter how called or equipped we are. So how does your work help people really soften toward the people they serve?
That's a great question. So that is the other arm, so to speak, of
Mm.
what we do at Compassionate Coaching. So I bring on professional role players. And I came to this work because I started as a standardized patient, and a lot of hospital or med schools, I should say, will hire standardized patients who usually are actors, and they hire them to be patients so that med students can practice.
Yeah.
And it's a great field to be in. It's so exciting. It's so interesting. And I loved it, but I wasn't so fond of the, I have a cough cases as I was the, I have breast cancer and you have to tell me I have breast cancer. Like those were
Uh,
the really deep and hard and challenging conversations that I wanted to be a part of. And so the standardized patient world is a little different from what I do, I bring in professional role players so that we can hear exactly what it is you are struggling with. So maybe it's that, you're a nurse, but you're new to hospice and you feel very uncomfortable educating a family about the death process, about what they're going to expect. Or maybe you've been told like you don't handle that as delicately as you could.
Mm.
And so I facilitate the process. I bring in one of my role players and we get information about that. And it can happen very quickly, right? Like I don't need a full hour to learn your story and to learn what is hard for you, because we basically are just studiers of humanity and the human experience and emotions. And we are able to have a very brief conversation so I can hear what it is you're challenged by. My role player will be that person. So if they're, struggling with having the conversation about how to tell someone about the dying process, and they're really nervous because this is a very adamantly in denial adult child who doesn't want to believe that mom is dying and thinks that hospice is killing her. And so you need to kind of break through that barrier. And so my role player can be that person instantly and immediately. And then guess what? You're practicing with that person as opposed to someone who's actually receiving that news for the first time. So you get that practice and you get that feedback, because then the role player will step out of the role and say, okay, and I facilitate that process. Like, how did you feel when they said this? I noticed that, you backed away. What was that about? I noticed that you leaned in. I noticed that you started talking fast around this part. I noticed that you had a little bit of an eye roll. I noticed. And so we can break it down and really pinpoint, okay, this is what effective and compassionate communication is like. This is how it feels and looks on your body. And you're getting that feedback from someone, and it's a safe space. You're not really trying it out on someone who is actually receiving that news. So that is another really cool thing that we do, because we get to the heart of like, this is hard.
Yeah.
And you have to do this hard thing. Like, how are you going to do it in a way that the message is received and that you are not emotionally spent every time you have to have this conversation? Because it's also about taking care of yourself as the provider.
How do you feel about the phrase, there is no easy way to say this?
I think it's possibly helpful depending on the situation. I like it in some ways because it acknowledges that it's what we call a warning shot, which I don't like that terminology anyway, but like it's telling the brain something hard is coming.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like it. I think there are other ways that could be more helpful, but that's it. I feel like you have a backstory about that phrase. I want to hear what you think about that phrase.
You know what's funny? I don't, but I was thinking, gosh, that is one of the phrases that makes me angry, because of course there's an easier way to say this. How dare you put something so black and white on the most gray, nuanced experience of anyone's life, right? My
Nice.
brain
Yeah.
goes to, well, the easier way to say this is, we're about to have an incredibly complicated and dysregulating conversation. So I'm here to go as slowly as possible. You ask me to repeat myself as often as you need.
Amen.
And whatever doesn't feel good in your body, just notice it. I'll stop talking.
Yep.
This takes as long as it takes. That's something that I think for me, there's no easy way to say this, is the discomfort of the person delivering the news, wanting to get out of the situation as fast as possible. So not necessarily a story, but more of an awareness about how, as providers, we can center ourselves without recognizing what we've done. And I appreciate direct answers. Like, that is direct and clear is kind. It's so necessary, but there's no easy way to say this. Feels like, sure there is. It's just a lot harder for you.
Yes. It almost, yeah, it's a centering, like you said, this idea that this is hard for both of us is not helpful. And so if that's the message that's coming across, that's not a good situation to start the conversation with, because you have no idea how many times this conversation is going to replay in
Right.
the other person's brain forever.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's hard for you and it's not about you at all.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. Knowing that they will come back to it over and over, knowing that they have questions they don't know to ask right now. I mean, when
Mhm.
my mom was on hospice, I didn't believe that the hospice workers were causing her demise. I knew she was dying. I deeply believed they were neglecting her and
Mm.
not helping her to be comfortable and sustain. And it was interesting because there weren't people available. I guess I do have more of a story about it. There was no explicit, this is hard news. There's no easy way to say this. But it was a consistent, well, she, a non-use of her name and depersonalization of the
Mhm.
situation and consistently like standing at a distance because of what she was going through and the medication she was on. And it was just that's it, a depersonalization of the most personal, intimate, difficult, you know, it's nearly violent communication to do it in such a way that you try to extract yourself as quickly as possible. So I'm grateful to hear that your work is specifically around helping people not to be that um, disconnected from their own humanity in those moments that they would want someone to be present. Or and to be fair, maybe they wouldn't. Maybe someone would say, "Please just be straight. She's dying of cancer. Great. Thank you so much. Goodbye." And do their own private work, but the majority of people are not those people.
Correct.
Not to mention, I'm thinking in those moments, the people who want the direct would say, "Could you just cut the bull and tell me exactly what I'm doing?" Absolutely, I can. I feel like the softer approach is the smarter approach for the majority of people, though. Mic drop.
Yes. Yes. Well placed mic drop. And I loved the way you started that because you were doing so many things at once. You were saying, this is really going to be hard for you to listen to. This is
Yeah.
some very hard information. I'm going to go as slow as possible. You're giving them permission. I mean, a lot of times people don't feel empowered to say, can you go back to that other thing? And so when you start with that and say, please stop me at any time. I love that phrase. I tell when I work with med students still, I tell them that. Like that's a beautiful phrase to use because you're in a power dynamic, whether you know it or not.
Yep.
And anytime you can give power to the other person, do it. So whether it's please interrupt me at any time,
Yeah.
whether it's just these extensive pauses where you're waiting for their questions, because you know they're going to have them. They're going to have something that either doesn't make sense, they're ruminating on something you said 2 minutes ago and they're not listening. Like whether it's whatever you can do to empower the other person in a very disempowering situation is helpful.
Yeah. That's a great point to make. We don't necessarily consider it a power dynamic situation where there's a caregiver and a family member, but it is. And I think it's easy to lose sight as a caregiver, or a grief professional, or trauma professional, whatever you are in, of the authority you have in the moment and of the power you have to cause harm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to lose sight of the service role that you're in, that you're here to care for and the individual and by extension their family members as well. It's a very sacred space, as we know, in that industry, but we also know that we get burnt out, like I said before, and really don't have necessarily the support in our own lives that we need to get out of that burnout state. So speaking of which, you mentioned your storyteller workshop that just happened here in June and is coming up again. When can people find, when are details going to be available for that next workshop, and how can people get involved if they're interested?
So the next workshop will be happening most likely the end of the summer or early fall. And if they go to my website, there will be information available. And I know that'll be in the show notes. And also just on LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And I always talk about the next storytelling workshops when they'll be available. And you can find information there.
What can someone who wants to participate expect from that environment?
So when you arrive, they're virtual. So when you arrive, you will be welcomed by some house music by one of our lovely musicians, just to help get you grounded and settled. Music, as you know, activates different parts of our brain that helps us relax and be more open to creativity. And I do a very short didactic just on storytelling. I want people to be able to have something to take with them, because whether you're coming as a death doula or a hospice nurse or a social worker, like you're coming and you work with other people in some capacity. So I'm giving them a little bit of information about storytelling in general and how to encourage storytelling with your team. And then we just dive right in. And it's about 45 to 50 minutes of playback. And we have a conductor who's like a facilitator for the process. And they just invite us to share stories with questions. So the prompt that I like to use for the storytelling workshop, which is specifically for people who work in end of life or bereavement, is, why do you do what you do? Why did you choose this field? And the stories are just phenomenal. So one at a time, someone will share a story about why they chose to work in this field. And the facilitator will guide them. They'll use follow-up questions and really make sure that we're getting a full story. And just that process of just like being able to share your story with other bereavement and end-of-life professionals is just so powerful in and of itself. But then what happens is the conductor will say, let's watch. And then the musician and the actors will play back the story. And it's not necessarily a chronological playing back. It's artistic. It's basically the sky's the limit. I mean, I could be playing grief. I could be playing a dog. I could be playing you. I could be playing your mom. I could be playing, the world, the patriarchy. I mean, the sky is the limit as to what I could be playing and what my colleagues could be playing. And then we just invite you back. I know you said earlier, just this checking in about, is that right? Did I get that right? We do that too. So then we invite the person who told the story to come back and say, did we capture your story? And we get to hear, and then the next person shares their story and we're off to the races.
Thank you for sharing so much detail. I know that transparency makes those kind of events where they're very vulnerable a lot safer for people to consider. Even in this industry, we're still human, we're still grievers, we're still individuals, despite our professional backgrounds. And I think that is really valuable as an offering, both in itself, but also just to say, hey, this is what you can expect. So thank you for decreasing the overwhelm, even if it was just for me. Yeah. Erin, you're a gift, and the work that you do, I do love how you've taken your whole entirety of your life experience and this beautiful vision for what you want to create in the world, and just crafted this incredibly unique um, program and company to serve people who are serving, but also to honor your own story and to bring people into a safer place to do that for themselves and others. So thank you so much, both for being here, but also for what you do. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Mandy. I received that, and I thank you as well for everything that you're doing for grievers.
Oh, of course. Thank you for listening to episode 139 of Restorative Grief. I thought this conversation was so interesting because this idea of improv, basically, in the setting of the death and dying and being a caregiver, can provide so much cathartic and compassionate space for those of us who are grieving. We know that owning our story and learning how to tell our story is an incredibly healing opportunity, but we often don't have a safe space to do that. So I love that Erin is not only creating that for people who are industry professionals, but that so much of what we talked about can easily be translated into your day-to-day life, whether you're a caregiver or a bereavement professional or not. I also think the part about passing the age of someone who has died is really important. So if you kind of glazed over that, go back and listen. If someone in your life has died and you aren't quite that age yet, your body might start showing signs that it's coming before you realize it. So becoming mindful and learning about how grief can manifest now is exactly how we help ourselves out as it shows up in the future. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, I just want to say thank you for making time to lean toward yourself and be intentional and to elevate end-of-life conversations in your own world. Please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star review because we want other people to find this work. It makes a big difference. There are always more episodes, transcripts, and resources available at mandykpart.com. And as I've mentioned before, we would love for you to become a patron of the show if you're interested in more support or just more resources. And the nice thing about being a patron is that means you can remember that you are also creating resources and grief support for people that you don't know. That's a big deal because this is a communal effort. Please remember to go check out Erin's website, compassionatecoaching.org, links in the show notes, of course, and find us on Instagram or LinkedIn where she's at, because I know she would love to hear from you as well. And as always, one last thing before we go. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.